As American farmers and ranchers continue to expand, the USDA expects 2018 will be a huge year for meat output. Producers may generate record amounts of beef, pork, and poultry this year. That could increase competition and pressure prices. Purdue ag economist David Widmar joined us earlier this week to describe the forecast for U.S. consumption of each meat. We started our conversation by asking what we could expect for total meat consumption in 2018.
Total meat consumption in 2018 is supposed to be up. This is our fourth year higher. We're expected to come in at 223 pounds. That's significant because this is the highest level we've recorded total meat. This is red meat and total poultry combined. This is the highest levels we've seen going back to the 1970s, and we finally exceeded our pre-recession levels of 222 pounds back in 2007 and 2008.
Describe what happened during the Great Recession and the recovery we've seen since then.
Yeah, so we sort of had a couple of factors come together. Started off with the Great Recession. Of course, the economy slowed down, the housing bubble. Consumers pulled back on meat consumption. And then, of course, we had some adjustments in the ag sector as well. We had strong commodity prices and a pullback in production, which sort of prolonged the reduction in consumption. And so we've had about 6 years of decline. Starting in 2015, we saw an increase. So about a decade here to recover, 6 years down, 4 years up. But we've seen some pretty strong recovery here in the last few years. And that's really some of the strongest recovery we've seen going back to the mid-1970s.
Well, and that recovery is especially important to beef, correct?
Yeah, probably one of the strongest recoveries we've seen in beef. In total, we've seen beef consumption climb up from 54 pounds during the trough here a few years ago. We've seen 3 solid years of increases, and now we're at 59 pounds, which is very impressive. We've had a 5-pound increase over the last 3 years. Several years with 2% and 3% annual growth in consumption. 2018 expected to be at 4%. Really, this beef recovery is not impressive because of the magnitude of the recovery, more than just the fact that there is a recovery. We really haven't seen beef consumption tick higher. Again, going back to the 1970s, we've seen a pretty steady decline in consumption, and so the fact that we've seen a recovery here is noteworthy.
Well, pork is kind of unique. Well, I should say kind of different among the three meats in that it doesn't really change. Why is that?
Yeah, we sort of have a trend for each of the meat categories, and the trend for pork is sideways. Really going back to the 1970s, pork consumption has hovered around 50 pounds per person per year. During the recession, we pulled back a little bit, but we've since seen a recovery to more than 50 pounds. Again, a lot plays into consumers and consumers' choices when they're deciding to purchase meat and then how they substitute.
And meanwhile, chicken just keeps climbing. What do we expect to see in 2018?
2018, a record year for poultry consumption at 112 pounds. It's interesting that poultry consumption was about 50 pounds back in the 1970s. In the early 2000s, 2003 to be specific, we crossed that 100-pound threshold. We increased a little bit from there, but then pulled back to 100 during the recession. Now we're back to 112 pounds. Back above those pre-recession levels. Strong poultry consumption here in the U.S., and that's been a story that's been going on for a long time.
Finally, you track red meat consumption as a total meat consumption, as a percentage of. What does it show this year?
Yeah, so we're creeping back above that 50% mark. Beef or red meat as a share of all meat consumption is back above 50% of consumption. Going back to the 1970s, red meat's share was almost 75%. So thinking about 4 meals, 3 of them being beef in the 1970s, or red meat in the 1970s, and now we're down to about half of them being red meat and half of them being poultry. So a big shift in consumers' preferences over a generation or two.